Good morning. My name is Peter Frankopan. I'm a Professor of Global History at Oxford University. And welcome to the first session on global goals for local impact, strengthening policy coordination for successful implementation of development goals. A couple of quick changes to the advertised program. I'm afraid that Mr. Sheikh Ahmad Matin, the Deputy Mayor of Kabul, wasn't able to secure his visa on time or successfully, which is of course a great shame for all of us interested in Central Asia that he's not able to join us. And also Wazim Akhtar, the Mayor of Karachi, I'm afraid is not able to join us either today. But I'm delighted to announce that we have another panelist, Mr. Xu Lin, the Director General of the China Centre for Urban Development. Mr. Xu is an extremely experienced official who's been involved in regional and national development plans for China, particularly with relations to urbanization. So we're very lucky that he's able to share his expertise with us this morning. Now, all of you know that the secret to sustainability is good planning, so we're already about half an hour behind schedule, so we're going to try to make up some of that time through the talks. So I'll go straight on and introduce you to our keynote speaker this morning, who is Mr. Hong Pingfan, who is going to give the keynote speech. Mr. Hong is the Director of Development Policy Analysis Division at the United Nations Department for Economic and Social Affairs. Mr. Hong.
Thank you, Professor Frankopan. Good morning, Excellencies, distinguished guests, and colleagues. I'm honored to speak at this session. My topic is on integrated policy approaches to the implementation of the 2030 Agenda. I want to start with the cross-cutting nature of the SDGs, which requires integrated policy approaches. After sketching a theoretical framework, I will focus more on integrated policy approach in practice, showing one example on how to integrate the Belt and Road and the 2030 Agenda. At the core of the 2030 Agenda is the determination by all UN member states to eradicate poverty and hunger in all their forms, secure a sustainable planet for future generations, and build peaceful, inclusive societies as a foundation for ensuring lives of dignity for all. With 17 Sustainable Development Goals and 169 targets covering economic, social, and environmental dimensions, the 2030 Agenda is not only ambitious and universal, but also integrative. One of my colleagues in UNDESA has identified interlinkages among different goals and produced a web, as shown in this figure. The large dots present the SDG goals, and the small ones, the targets. There are different ways to identify the linkages, but we all agree that the SDGs are intensively cross-cutting each other. This is the reason for the member states to call for integrated policy approaches to the implementation of the 2030 Agenda and emphasize on the achievement of the totality of the SDGs rather than individual goals. Then what is an integrated policy approach? Theoretically, we can define an integrated policy in a framework of dynamic programming. We define the objective function as the weighted average of the gaps between the goals and the observed progress as measured in SDG indicators. The progress as measured by the indicators is a function of policy variables and other variables. The policy variables belong to three subsets: economic policies, such as monetary policy, fiscal policy, then social policies such as redistribution measures and environmental policies such as carbon tax and greenhouse gases emission quota. The constraints for this dynamic programming framework include economic, social, and environmental constraints. For example, the system of national accounts, budget constraints for government, household, firms, external balance constraints, demographic structure, and boundaries of the planet's ecosystems. With this setting, an integrated policy approach is to pursue a solution to this dynamic programming problem by identifying a set of optimal policies which minimize the gaps in the achievement of the SDGs by 2030 agenda, subject to a set of economic, social, and environmental constraints. Implicitly, we would require a central planning agency to make the decision. In practice, we may not be able to follow exactly this theoretical framework. Instead, we can pursue some ad hoc integrated policy approaches. For example, we can still formulate sector-oriented policies such as monetary policy, but we should augment the constraints by taking into account not only economic conditions, but also social and environmental constraints. We should also integrate and coordinate many existing global, regional, and national development strategies and cooperation frameworks with the 2030 agenda. One good example here is to integrate China's initiative for jointly building the Silk Road economic belt and the 21st century maritime Silk Road, that is the Belt and Road in brief, with the 2030 agenda. The Belt and Road runs through Asia, Europe, and Africa, connecting the vibrant East Asia at one end and developed European economies at the other, and encompassing in the middle countries which are currently underdeveloped but have huge potential. About 65 countries are along the Belt and Road, accounting for 60% of the world population, 30% of the global GDP, and 40% of the world trade. These countries are also the home for more than 50% of the people under extreme poverty worldwide. The Belt and Road has defined 5 priority areas for international development cooperation, namely 5 types of connectivity. First, policy connectivity or policy coordination, including coordination of development strategies and joint policy support for large-scale projects. Second, facilities connectivity, including connection of infrastructure plans among countries, formation of regional infrastructure network, and promotion of green and low-carbon infrastructure. Third, trade and investment connectivity, including removal of barriers for investment and trade, implementation of the WTO Trade Facilitation Agreement, and expansion of mutual investment. Fourth, financial connectivity, including financial regulatory cooperation to address cross-border financial risks and crises, and establishment of Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank and other new financial institutions. Last, people-to-people connectivity, including culture and academic exchange and cooperation in science and technology. In a recent study, we have identified a large set of intrinsic linkages from the 5 priority areas of the Belt and Road to the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. The Belt and Road can significantly advance the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals to end poverty and hunger, promote gender equality, and transform consumption and production patterns. For example, infrastructure investment is an important facilitator for eradicating poverty. As a Chinese saying goes, building the road is the first step towards prosperity. Connectivity in such areas as transport, water, sanitation, irrigation, telecommunication, and energy can also directly improve social and economic equality in both opportunity and outcome. Infrastructure investment can also accelerate the achievement of gender equality and the empowerment of women and girls. The 5 priority areas under the Belt and Road Initiative are also well dovetailed to the 7 action areas of the Addis Ababa Action Agenda, which is an integral part of the 2030 Agenda. At DESA, we have also launched a capacity development project for strengthening national policy capacity in developing countries along the Belt and Road so that they can fully benefit from the potential of the Belt and Road for achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. The project involves 4 key elements. First, training for policymakers and policy researchers on integrated policy approaches to undertaking the Belt and Road and to accelerate the achievement of the SDGs. Through training, we are going to form an international consortium among experts and policy institutions along the Belt and Road. Second, promoting policy dialogue at national, international, and global levels. Third, conducting joint research and policy analysis with a focus on the effects across the participating countries and the spillover for the rest of the world. Lastly, producing a joint report on the latest development under the Belt and Road Cooperation in close connection with the prospects for the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. When we start to implement this project soon, we are going to partner with the UNIDO and other UN agencies. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Hong. That's the perfect start to the conference.
Microphone, please.
The overlap between the 2030 Agenda and the Belt and Road Goals is a point that I think everybody in this room recognizes, and particularly the accelerator that the Belt and Road Initiative will play and is already playing across large parts of Asia and Africa and Europe because of the levels of investment. It's exactly right to focus on the importance of planning and coordination. Nothing is built by chance that works. And it's particularly important to stress, as Mr. Hong, you've done so eloquently, the underlying motivation and objective of eradicating hunger and poverty, accelerating social change, and it's particularly pleasing, I think, for you to draw attention to gender equality, which is so important in all parts of the world. I'm next going to ask Grace Wong to talk in response. I think from the lectern would be great. Ms. Wong is the Deputy Director of Programme Operations at the United Nations Office for South Cooperation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, let me also express my thanks to UNIDO and the Finance Center on South-South Cooperation for the invitation for the organization of this event. On behalf of the United Nations Office on South-South Cooperation, it is a great pleasure for me to speak here on the session about policy coordination. I would like to focus my talk today on enhancing South-South and triangular cooperation to synchronize efforts at regional and local levels for the achievement of sustainable development goals. When we think about global impact and local actions, many of us may recall our experiences in implementing the Millennium Development Goals. At that time, I still remember clearly that when a goal was reached at global level, we started with the first few years about nationalization of those goals. And then it's a little bit late, in my opinion, in the process that we talked about localization of MDGs. However, today, we live in a different era. This is an era of transformation, and this is a world that people, countries, cities, regions are much more connected in a way that we have never seen before, in a way that is more horizontal than vertical. So today, we have greater potential for countries developing or developed to work together to synchronize our efforts to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. So in this context, I would like to say that the Belt and Road Initiative is a clear example of connecting regions, countries, and cities on all aspects with its clearly stated 5 priority areas of cooperation that Professor Hongping Fan was just talking about. As a global cooperation scheme, the Belt and Road Initiative also seeks to maximize its impact through linking up with other South-South and triangular cooperation mechanisms and efforts at regional and local levels. Let me highlight here a few examples of synchronized efforts through South-South cooperation. At the level of aligning development visions, Agenda 2063 of the African Union presents a strategic framework for the socio-economic transformation of the Africa continent. It envisions an integrated, prosperous, and peaceful Africa, driven by its citizens and representing a dynamic force in the international arena. Agenda 2063 Africa took a bottom-up approach involving extensive consultations with people of Africa, and for the first time put policy coherence as the focus of the initiative. Other examples also include ASEAN Community Vision 2025, a forward-looking roadmap that articulates ASEAN goals and aspirations to realize further consolidation, integration, and stronger cohesiveness as a community. It is working towards a community that is politically cohesive, economically integrated, and socially responsible. In addition to coherence at the aspirational and visional level, we all know that basic infrastructure and connectivity lay the foundation for delivering such common collective goals of developing countries. We have seen the emergence of regional connectivity plans, such as APAC Connectivity Blueprint, initiative for the integration of regional infrastructure in South Africa. And as we just speak, in Bali, actually, the ASEAN ministers of transport are meeting their European counterparts at the Asia-Europe meeting of ministers of transport to strengthening the growing agenda of European Union and ASEAN connectivity. Connectivity through infrastructure is a means to support greater trade and economic activity, which in turn benefits people's lives. However, cross-border transport routes can be severely hampered by the lack of operational capacities and cumbersome customs procedures. South-South cooperation can also help to strengthen capacities that are vital to expand trade flows. A good example here is the Turkic Council Customs Training Program. The Turkic Council has launched a high-level mechanism to improve cooperation in the areas of customs support and support its member states, Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and Turkey, in installing state-of-the-art customs systems. The program also includes joint visits to key customs points, including those on Kyrgyzstan Chinese and Kazakhstan Chinese borders, to learn about efficient, effective customs processes and enhanced trade potential. Such kind of efforts are very important, especially for landlocked developing countries. And this is the soft capacity development to support the connectivity and infrastructure schemes that we are talking about today. Aligned vision, coordinated policies, and strengthened capacity are enablers for efficient and effective cooperation in the form of concrete projects and partnerships. So at the level of concrete projects and exchanges, South-South cooperation, especially city-to-city exchanges and cooperation, is the key. City governments, authorities, and stakeholders are increasingly work together to share solutions in order to achieve sustainable development. UN Office for South-South Cooperation, in partnership with the government of China and UNIDO, has jointly developed the Silk Road City Alliance Initiative, connecting cities along Belt and Road Initiative to coordinate policy, exchange solutions and technology, and facilitate trade, investment, and people-to-people exchanges. The Silk Road Cities Alliance will work through three major pillars. Firstly, the annual Cities Forum will bring mayors and other high-level government officials together to enable the dialogue and coordination on policy issues. Second, the Alliance will also develop a business council to bring together chambers of commerce, industrial associations to identify opportunities and challenges in strengthening relationship between cities and to foster concrete partnerships. The third pillar would be specialized committees that will be aligned with the 5 priority areas of the Belt and Road Initiative. So in the spirit that I talked about, for Belt and Road Initiative, in order to maximize its impact, it is important to work together with all the other South-South cooperation and triangular cooperation mechanisms. In the same spirit, our City Alliance will also work with other initiatives, especially networks, such as World Alliance of Cities Against Poverty and 100 Resilient Cities. Ladies and gentlemen, our rivers run into oceans. We hope by aligning our vision and directions at global, regional, and local levels, we can integrate efforts through various mechanisms. Together, we can create a sea change in development progress. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Wong, for a sweeping vision of the world, which took us from South Africa to Bali to the cities of the Silk Roads and the Belt and Road Initiative. It's extremely important to be reminding us of the significance of different initiatives that allow for collaboration and cooperation. And I don't want to be a downer on the proceedings, but I'm also aware, as all of you are, that we're living in a world that is also very fragile, where sometimes discussions are not as easy as they might be. But the emphasis on frictionless trade, on the attempt to try to facilitate bureaucracy, to reduce problems of border and cross-border trade is absolutely essential. And as a historian of the Silk Roads, I can tell you that that's exactly how Asia rose in the first place. Removing obstacles is the best way to improve collaboration. So your point that all rivers run into oceans, I think, is the perfect theme for today. The need for all of the strands to come together to fill the great seas is extremely sensible and a point very well made. The next speaker, I'm going to ask for Peter Shekvari, who is the Senior Advisor to the Mayor of Budapest, to share some thoughts with us too.
Ladies and gentlemen, first of all, I would like to thank you for the invitation. On behalf of the City of Budapest, I'm proud of it to share our experience on this important topic and theme. First of all, may I say something about Budapest. Budapest is the capital of Hungary, and not in the Chinese meaning, like Vienna's meaning. It is a relatively small city with 1,700,000 inhabitants. However, in the EU, it is the 80th largest city. It means it's a very important role Budapest has in the EU. And with the agglomeration area, Budapest is the headquarters of the Central Hungarian region. It means included 3 million people and produced approximately 35% of the Hungarian GDP. And therefore, it's a very important role in the capital and the regional headquarters and the domestic economic drivers. And regarding the topic, because one of the 5 priority areas was mentioned, the policy coordination, how we could implement that in the strategic planning and programming. First of all, in the EU, there is a special words, trendy words using about the multi-level governance, because every cities and municipalities regarding to the regional, national, and sub-national EU governance issue and governance policy issues. That is the reason of it why we are speaking, beside the multi-level governance issue, the partnership governance. Partnership governance regarding not only the vertical partnership, however, how Mr. Wans mentioned the horizontal partnership. It's very important for us when we are speaking about the strategic planning and programming. What does it mean? Budapest is a special city with a 2-tier public administration system. Inside the city, we have 23 districts with local self-government rights. And therefore, we need a partnership, a vertical partnership with the districts and the elected bodies in the districts. Also, in the regional level, our partners, the national government and the EU institutions. May I say something about it? We have accepted a Budapest 2030 strategic plan and program in 2030. It could be called the 2030 Agenda Local Implementation in Budapest, using the agenda elements and using the integrated approach regarding the economic, social, and environmental aspects and requirements. Budapest also not only a member of the EU, however, the member of the Covenant of Mayors and the Platform of Mayors who are focusing on the climate and energy system, and therefore we are very important how we could implement that requirements into the strategic plan and strategic programming. Regarding the horizontal and vertical partnership, may I say something about a macro-regional policy inside the EU. Inside the EU, there is a new Danube strategy, a macro-regional strategy, covering 150 million peoples and inhabitants, including 14 countries. And we established in Budapest in 2009 a council for Danube cities and regions. And nowadays, we are favoring the implementation of the macro-regional EU strategy in the city and regional level, working together with the EU institutions, the national institutions, and the regional one. And we have a good experience on the cross-border activity, the interregional activity, and transnational activity regarding how I could mention about it, the vertical and horizontal partnership. And may I say something about the implementation of the Budapest 2030, because we are using in the project level, in the program implementation level, the triple helix methodology. What does it mean? For example, we have established an e-mobility forum involving not only the industry, the car industry, the electricity industry, the national and local governments, and the technical universities. However, we involving the association of the private car owners and the association of the Chamber of Commerce and Chamber of Industry. Nowadays, we are speaking not only the triple helix methodology in that field, quattro helix methodology, involving not only the industrial party and the national and local governments and the technical partners from the universities and research institutions, however, the association from the society and their partners. And may I say something how we could use other tools for the implementation of the strategy and strengthening the policy coordination and policy cohesion. For example, we are the member of the CEPI, and under the umbrella of the CEPI and ICLEI, we are use a special tool for the public procurement issues. We are using a special nickname of that, sustainable and innovative public procurement instruments, which is dealing with not only the economic fears of the project proposals and investments, however, it's required beside the price other values, for example, the environmental sustainability values and innovative values also. Therefore, the tenderers and the applicants should show us the other elements of the tenders and the projects and the products and the service delivery, not only the price. And may I speak about a little bit about a new instruments, which is researched by us using the ESCO model. The ESCO model was well known in the energy sector, like the energy service company model. We think it, and nowadays we use a new nickname, ISCO model. What does it mean, the ISCO model? It is the innovative service company model, using the ESCO model not only in the energy sector, however, in other service delivery like the transportation, the water management, and other local and regional service deliveries issues. And may I think, last but not least, about the financing instruments, because it's very important not only on behalf of the World Bank and the other financial instruments, because we are supporting the economic investors in Budapest in two ways and two instruments. So one of them is we have established the Economic Development Agency, who help first of all the startup SMEs and companies to settle in Budapest with the technical assistance and macro credit support in the financial issues. And we are preparing a new urban development fund using the loans for the investors and the developers, not only from the public sector, however, from everywhere in the world, and using a special capital, knowing or implementing the development capital. It is a mixture of the seed money and the risk capital, because it's required a long-term financial instruments for the long-term development affairs. Thank you for your kind attention. May I share you our experience? It would be interesting for you. And I declare that the city Budapest administration will join the Belt and Road inclusive and sustainable city net service network. Thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you, Mr. Shekvari, for your comments. It's very helpful to have the practical experiences of a particular city, and your point that Budapest is not on its own as a city. It needs to both function with its hinterland and its the neighbouring area, but also with both national and international and regional levels to be able to plot its own future in collaboration with those around it. Is, again, a very important point to make. The issue about how to actually implement strategies is a key point that you'll be talking about over the next couple of days. But for sure, the ability to find new tools and new instruments and to learn from other sectors, whether it's from the energy sector or to look at different ways of financing models, is extremely important. Cities and those running cities are rewarded when they innovate. The days of the past, the ways of the past, as a king of Zhao in the 4th century BC once said, the ways of the past are not good enough to understand and prepare for the ways of the present and the future. The next speaker I will ask Mr. Xu, the Director General of the China Centre for Urban Development, to say a few words to you.
Chair, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. It's my pleasure to be here to introduce some of my points on China's sustainable development, especially the sustainable urban development. I still remember 20 years ago when I was here, I did my collaborating project with UNIDO on China's sustainable industrial policy, but this time is sustainable urban development. So sustainable issue is actually is a long-term issue. It takes time to reach the targets that we set for different terms. So let me first introduce something about China's urbanization policy and the reality. In the past 40 years, China has experienced very rapid urbanization. The urban population among the total population of the country increased by 1.04% each year in the last 40 years. Therefore, we have more than 300 million migrated rural labor force has actually moved to urban areas and working and stay there. These people graduated from the poverty in the last more than 30 years. But China is still in the rapid period of the urbanization. The current urbanization rate is about 57.5%. But since the income gap between the urban population and the rural population is still as high as 2.7 times, if we consider the welfare, the gap between the urban and the rural populations, I think the gap or disparity between the urban and the rural populations is very big and huge. So that means in China we still have very strong incentive for those rural population to move from the rural areas, from the agricultural sectors to non-agricultural sectors and urban areas. According to our estimation, by 2020, China's urbanization rate will reach 60%. By 2030, such rate will be as high as probably more than 70%. So there will still be hundreds of millions rural populations in China moving from the rural areas to the urban areas. That's the situation in China. From the global point of view, I think the world is still in the way of the rapid urbanization. The current urbanization rate in the world is 55%. But since more and more developing countries is now taking the way to move for the rapid industrialization, I think in the future, the global urbanization will be still very rapid, and more rural populations in different countries will move to the urban and the non-agricultural sectors for a better life and higher salaries. As the urban population increasing, as the scale of the urban expanding, and more cities in China, and I think in other cities in the world are facing sustainable challenges, which including the air pollution issues, traffic jam issues, urban slum issues, and urban poverty issues, and the rapid rising of price of housing in big cities, the short supply of clean water, and incapability of the urban governance. In many cities in China, especially those industrial cities, they are facing the challenges how to upgrading their industrial structures in the new phase. So in dealing with all these kind of challenges, the central government of China actually made a kind of new pattern of urbanization plan, try to guide the urbanization in China to be more green and sustainable. We are actually making plans for development of a cluster of cities in China, try to guide the population and the industrial allocations among different cities within the cluster city areas by supporting of the modern infrastructure networkers, so we can promote the more reasonable divisions among cities, therefore can reduce or alleviate the pressure of mega cities like Beijing, Shanghai, and Guangzhou. We are encouraging the municipality government to initiate new energy replacement projects, and we encourage the local government to develop the share bicycles and any kind of sharing economy, because we believe such kind of development can reduce the waste of resources. In dealing all these challenges and problems, we find that some countries are better than other countries. Some cities are better than other cities. So among all these countries and the cities, we should build a better cooperation mechanism and a platform to allow all countries and the cities in the world to share their good experiences, to learn the bad lessons of others. Therefore, we can, in the world, as a whole society, to improving the sustainable urban development practices. UNIDO actually organized a kind of projects such as a bridge for cities. This is a very good mechanism and a platform in the global society, especially under the South-South cooperation and even the One Belt, One Road mechanism. We can promote the collaborations in all the cities and the countries along the road or belt and in the South and the South Cooperation Concrete. My organization, CCUD, China's Center for Urban Development, has already done a lot of work to encourage such sharings among China's cities. We did the international collaborations with Euro cities and other countries in bilateral way. We are considering to build a kind of mechanism and a platform with other international organizations and some city unions to have a kind of platform which we can, based on that, to share all the experiences and the cooperations based on that platform. We have already started to discuss with different agencies, different countries on such idea. We have already received very positive reactions from others. So we hope by these events we can further encourage the sharing and the cooperations in the sustainable urban development practices, and this is good for the sustainable agenda 2030. This is good for the sustainable urban development. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Xu, and I suppose on behalf of UNIDO, we should welcome you back after 20 years, back to UNIDO. It is very generous of you to be so candid with your knowledge and to remind us that it takes time to reach targets, and it's not easy to do so. Transition is difficult, particularly when it's accelerated, as in the case of China, but also the scale of the change, the pressure on traffic, infrastructure, housing, water, pollution, and so on are acute. And your message and your offer to share the experiences that you and China have had with the process of how to upgrade and how to plan for the future is a point that will be shared by many people here. I think we'll be very keen to work out how we can learn from China's experiences and how at conferences like this at UNIDO practical examples and expertise can be shared and borrowed and learnt from. It's clear that being able to listen and study other examples will help everybody plan better for the future. So I'll say a few brief words. I think we probably don't have time for a discussion before we have a coffee break. But I think the theme of the speakers today, starting with Professor Hong, but then all the other panelists, and for those who are speaking here later today, I think it's important to remind ourselves that we're living through a period where the urbanization of the world's population is at the fastest in human history. Over the course of the last 40 years, China has urbanized a population on the same speed and same scale that took Western Europe and the United States more than 150 years to do. And that puts enormous pressure on infrastructure and presents huge challenges. The megacity is not unique to China, nor is it even unique to Asia. We see many examples in the Americas and in Africa, but it's clear that the rise of massive scale populations in Asia and along the Belt and Road Initiative areas are ones that are going to challenge us all going into the future. The pressure that this puts on infrastructure, and in turn the acute pressure that puts on investment expectations and investment needs, is something that needs to be planned and thought through carefully in advance. All the panelists have shared their expertise with you and have all made the point that planning is not easy to do, but when there is planning that is done, it can't just be done on a city-by-city case. It needs to be done in connection with regional, national, and international cooperation at its heart. Cities have always been hubs for exchange, not just of goods, but also of ideas, of food, fashion, you name it. But cities are also enormous consumers with their populations. They're consumers of water, of food, of resources, of energy, of healthcare, of services, and the scale at which individual cities have needs to keep upgrading their infrastructure is mind-boggling. When you put multiple cities together, you see a kind of challenge that is truly global. We're reminded by the former president of Austria, Heinz Fischer, this morning that Vienna's population over the last 100 years has grown by only 100,000, from 1.7 million to 1.8 million. That's a very nice position to be in, because you can modify slowly. But we will see a future world where it's almost inevitable that there will be competition between cities for resources, competition for expertise, a competition and a challenge for migrant populations that will put some cities at better futures than those of others. And the only way in which that can be avoided, and the historical parallels, I don't need me to remind you, that competition can have a nasty side effect. It's to have conferences like this. Mr. Xu, your final point about the importance of UNIDO as an organization, but conferences like today, to enable people to realize that we can only win-win together. This is one of the key themes, I think, in the early 21st century. So I think on that note, we are 10 minutes behind. I'd like you all to refresh yourselves as you would like with a cup of coffee, but to be back here no later than 11:30 for the second session. But first of all, could you please thank the panelists and above all our keynote speaker, Professor Hong. Thank you very much.
Thank you.